This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone, Shalom Aleichem. A few inyanim about Chanukah. The first inyan is the most well-known Gemara about Chanukah, and probably the most well-known two words in all of Talmud Bavli. You know, if somebody were to say, what are the most famous two words in the Gemara? My Chanukah, it's got to be My Chanukah, which is a difficult question. What's Chanukah? No. My Pesach, My Purim. The Gemara doesn't ask My Purim. The Gemara asks My Chanukah, which is a very difficult question. What do you mean, what's Chanukah? But Rashi so beautifully says, Al Ezen Nes Kavuha, because there are two options. There's a military victory, and there's a miracle of the oil. So what the Gemara is asking, for which miracle did they enact Chanukah? Why? Because if they enacted it for the military victory, you can't say Hallel. Because you don't say Hallel for something that's in the guise of nature. But if it's for the miracle of the oil, you could say Hallel, because you can only say Hallel for a supernatural miracle. So there's a big question. Could you say Hallel for events that happened in the last 100 years of, let's say, wars that took place that were certainly miraculous, but it's not like all of a sudden, lightning came down from heaven and struck down our enemy. It was Rabin B'Yad Ma'atim in, the various wars in the last 100 years. The Kasha of the Gemara, My Chanukah, Rashi says, Al Ezen Nes Kavua, for which miracle? If it's a military victory, you can't say Hallel. If it's the miracle of the oil, of course you can say Hallel. The Gemara says it's the miracle of the oil. Not to say we're not celebrating the military victory, but which miracle was the Yom Tov enacted because of? That's how the Maritz Chios learns the Gemara. This is agav anything we say today, just for your own yediyah. Tzitz Eliezer brings it in a tshuva regarding saying Hallel on various calendar dates that there's somewhat of a dispute whether you can say Hallel or not. Okay, be it as it may, let's get to today we're going to do Tairas Brisk on Chanukah. Okay, this comes from the Sefer Ma'orei HaMoyadim, which is a collection of Brisker Torah on Chanukah. Very incisive questions. And the Gemara says, L'shana Acheres in year 2, which is also a very important diak. The year of the miracle of Chanukah, they did not enact anything. They made no Yom Tov in year 1. One of the reasons is because there were Jewish casualties, and it would have been insensitive to make a Yom Tov in year 1. Tzitz Eliezer quotes that as another reason. You're going to say Hallel because of different wars that were won, whatever year it was. But how many Jews fell in those wars? He says it's insensitive. Okay. The Gemara says, what's Chanukah? L'shana Acheres in year 2, Kava'um. They enacted, Vasam, they made it, Yomim Tovim, Yom Tov, Behalel, for the recitation of Hallel, the Hoidah, and thanking Hashem. Rashi says Hoidah is Al Anisim. Hallel, we know what Hallel is. So there's a very important question on the Gemara. The Gemara seems to have left out a very important part of Chanukah. There's a mitzvah that's conspicuously absent from the Gemara. What's the mitzvah? Lighting the menorah. You remember, that mitzvah where you light the menorah? The Gemara left out the most important part of Chanukah. By the way, does anybody know why is the Gemara is about Chanukah and Bameh Madlikin? Because Madlikin we talk about lighting their Shabbos, and Agavorcha we talk about lighting their Chanukah. And when a push comes to shove, the Gemara says, what's Chanukah? Kava'um va'asa'um. The Gemara leaves out the mitzvah, which is the whole reason that it appears in this parak in Shabbos. That might be the most important question on Chanukah. The Gemara that talks about the legislation of Chanukah does not say a word about lighting the menorah. Good question, no? So until today, over the years, we've said two approaches to this. Approach number 1 is Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Reb Tzalel Zolti. If you look in the Rambam says, in codifying this Gemara, Kava'um va'asam yamim tovim, Kavim va'asam yemei simcha. You ever remember these words of the Rambam? The Rambam says Chanukah are days of happiness. Huh? Days of Simcha? What does that mean? Shabbos is not a Yom Simcha. Shabbos is a Yom Oineg. But Chanukah, the Rambam says, is a day of Simcha. How do you fulfill that? There's no mitzvah to eat basar on Chanukah. So what does the Rambam mean? It's a day of Simcha. But then the Rambam continues. V'halel umadlike neiros. And the Rambam doesn't say anything about Hoidah. So if you look in the Rishonim, let's say the Piskei Riaz, he says, Umoidim al haneis al yedei hadlakas hamenorah. That the way you fulfill Hoidah, not like Rashi, Hoidah is al anisim, but the Rambam holds you fulfill Hoidah al yedei lighting the menorah. So the Gemara didn't leave out lighting the menorah. The Gemara said Hoidah. Hoidah is interpreted as lighting the menorah. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, if you light the menorah and you forget to think I'm lighting the menorah to thank Hashem, lo yatsa. You hear this chiddush? You could be mechavein to be mekayim the mitzvah of Chanukah, but says Rav Shlomo Zalman, if you light the menorah and you forget that this is the only mitzvah in the Torah, that you don't just do the mitzvah, but the mitzvah is to thank Hashem. The way I thank Hashem is lighting the menorah. Rav Shlomo Zalman says lo yatsa. Rabbi Tzal Zolti says chasar ha'ikar. Fine. That we've said in years past.
Than any other bracha?
What?
It's different than any other bracha?
Every other, yeah. But bracha, you mean bracha? Bracha.
Bracha's anywhere.
Yeah, there's no other mitzvah. All you have to do is make a bracha and do the mitzvah. You don't have to think that I'm doing it. Because the mitzvah is not, there's no mitzvah to light the menorah. There's no mitzvah to light the menorah. The mitzvah is to thank Hashem. The way you thank Hashem is by putting wick on it.
Would it be in the nusach of the bracha then?
It's not.
Why?
Nothing's ever in the nusach of the bracha. The nusach of the bracha is...
You don't need it to be yaitza.
No, because the nusach of the bracha is niskan on the act, not on the kiyum. The nusach is on the maisa, not on the kiyum.
In Haner Solo we say Kedei L'Hoidos.
Yeah, in Haner Solo you do say Kedei L'Hoidos, but if you weren't aware of this chiddush, then you're misasek ba'alma.
You need the Shem Yichud.
Even in the Shem Yichud you don't have it.
But you hear me, I'm saying it.
So even if you said the Shem Yichud, you wouldn't be Yosef if you didn't have this in mind. Because it's not in the Shem Yichud. And even if you say in Haner Salolu, the person has no conscious awareness that they're doing that. Anyway, that's Rav Shlomo Zalman. Now, there's another approach. This is the approach of Rabbi Shua Mikutno, one of the all-time great Polish Gaonim. He has another chiddush. He says, you know why the Gemara doesn't say to light the menorah? No, this is all background till we get to the Brisker chiddush. Because they didn't make a mitzvah to light the menorah. Who made a mitzvah to light the menorah? Would you see in the Gemara anywhere there's a mitzvah to light the menorah? Yeah, but not right away. What's the reason to light the Ner Chanukah? To remember the Beis HaMikdash. So long as the Beis HaMikdash was standing and there was a menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, there was no mitzvah to light the menorah. Lighting the menorah was legislated 200 years later. That's why the lashon of the Rambam is, it's days of Hallel. You want to light candles? You can light candles. There's no legislation to light candles. It's optional. Then the Rambam says later on, Hiskinu Chachamim to light the menorah. So Rabbi Shua Mikutna said the reason the Gemara leaves it out is because it leaves it out for good reason. There was no such mitzvah. Same way they weren't masakin to bring a carbon tamid, they weren't masakin to light the menorah. But the Brisker Rav has a different approach. I was not aware of this until last night.
The Gemara was written after the second Beis.
Sure, right. But the Gemara is talking about the legislation of Chanukah in year 2. So in year 2, they made Hallel, they made Hoidah, they didn't make lighting the menorah.
The answer is that in the Gemara itself, they don't...
Yeah, later, of course, 200 years later, they made such a mitzvah, and the Gemara discusses that mitzvah that was made at a later time.
So it is mentioned in the Gemara to light the menorah.
The Gemara talks about it, but the Gemara that speaks about the enactment of Chanukah, that little passage leaves out the legislation of lighting the menorah. The Brisker Rav has a completely different take on this. It's not the pshat you fulfill, that the mitzvah is thanking Hashem, which is fulfilled through lighting the menorah. It's not because in year 2 they did not establish lighting the menorah. No. The mitzvah lighting the menorah is like every other mitzvah. Just light the menorah. You don't have to be thinking anything. You could even be thinking about that even though maybe you're 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, you could be thinking you hope your parents still get you a Chanukah present. You could be thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner. Whatever you want to think about, you could think about, says the Brisker. Says the Brisker of Avada, they were masakin to light the menorah immediately in year one. The lashon of the Gemara is, my Chanukah. What is Chanukah? What is the character of the days of Chanukah? Rashi says, al eza nes kavua. Meaning, what are the days of Chanukah? How do we define the character of Chanukah? The Gemara answers, the days of Chanukah are days of Hallel. Hallel defines the quality of the day. Haidah, the recitation of Al-Anisim, defines the quality of the day. They're part of Chevtza Shel Yom. By the way, Rav Shmuel Felder, Paisik in Lakewood, points out, if you forget Al-Anisim, you don't have to say over Shemana Esrei. The only thing is, you didn't observe Chanukah. You're right, you don't have to be Shemana Esrei, but you didn't celebrate Chanukah. But lighting the menorah is just a Maisa mitzvah, but they're not Yomim Shel Hadlakas Haneros. The lighting of the menorah is just an act, but we didn't ask, what should you do on Chanukah? We asked, what is the quality of the day of Chanukah? How do we define the essence of the days? The answer is, these are days of recitation of Hallel, days of recitation of Haidah. But lighting the menorah is not me'ikaron shel hayom. It's a mitzvah. It's an important mitzvah. But the days of Chanukah, they're not days of lighting the menorah. You happen to light the menorah on that day. The lighting of the menorah does not define the character of the day. You hear the words? You hear? Now he says, this is Mevorah in the Rambam. The Rambam says, Umipnei zeh, if you look in the second paragraph, Hiskinu chachamim sheba'osei hadar. The rabbis of that generation enacted Sheyu Shmoinas Yamim Ha'elu, that these 8 days, Shetchilasei Chafei B'Chazavs, they are Yemei Simcha, days of happiness, V'Halel, U'Madlikin B'Hen Neiros. And by the way, you happen to light the Neiros. The Lashon of the Rambam is very clear that lighting of the Neiros is not of definition. It's just what you happen to do on those days. They're Yemei Simcha, Yemei Halel, Umadlikin B'Hen Neiros. Remember we said the possessions were just Asher Rachashu, that they happen to possess. So Madlikin B'Hen Neiros is what you do, but doesn't define the day. That's how the Brisker learns it. So if somebody asks you, why does the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos not talk about the mitzvah of lighting the menorah? The Gemara that talks about the legislation of Chanukah, why doesn't it mention lighting the menorah? So what do you mean? There's 3 answers. Shomazam and Arbach, it does. Haidah. And according to that, if you light the menorah and you don't think it's an expression of gratitude, la yatsa. Second answer is Rabbi Shmuel Mikutna, because they didn't enact it immediately. And the third answer is the Brisker, because the lighting of the menorah is not definitional. It's the other aspects of Chanukah are definitional. Next inyan. Next inyan is, we know that when it comes to Hamichya on Chanukah, you know, Rav Shlomo Zalman has a famous vart. Why do people eat jelly donuts on Chanukah? Because the Yevanim destroyed the Mizbeach, and we want to pray on Chanukah for the restoration of the Mizbeach. So we make an Hamichya in order to say V'yal Mizbechecha, V'yal Heichalecha. But on the other hand, I heard from very holy sources that when it comes to jelly donuts, we should very closely adhere to that which it says, Ein lanu reshus l'hishtamish bahem, ela l'roisam bilvad. But anyway, it's interesting, with all this Torah, there's no mention of Chanukah and Hamichya. We say Al Anisim in Berchas Hamazayin. Why don't we say, we say, Rotzei v'achinseinu b'yom HaShabbos hazeh, we say v'samchenu b'yom Chag HaSukkos hazeh, we say v'zachrenu l'toiva b'yom Rosh HaChodesh hazeh. Why don't we say v'zachrenu l'toiva b'yom Chanukah hazeh? Why is there no mention, you eat the jelly donut, your mamish, your moiser nefesh al kiddush Hashem, to eat the jelly donut, mamish mesiras nefesh, to be mekayim minhag Yisrael. and you don't mention anything about Chanukah. V'hadavar tzarich biur. Okay, so before I tell you the Brisker Rav, after I put this, I found Rabbi Vadia talks about this in the Tshuva. He brings a very beautiful answer. I love it, and he rejects it. He brings there's a difference between Yalav Yavai and Ritzei and Alanisim. Yalav Yavai, what bracha do we say it in? Rachimna. Ritzei, we say in Rachimna. Alanisim, we say in Naida. So that means we would have to find a place in Hamichya to fit in Alanisim. We would, in other words, we find a place to fit in Ritzei and Yalav Yavai. Namely, after V'nei Yerushalayim Ra'akash M'Hevi Yamin V'alinu Sechav S'chon Yamnecham B'Yam S'om Tavan R'Chalav B'Shal Torah Ritzei V'Achitzenu. It fits into V'nei Yerushalayim. But where exactly are you going to put Alanisim? It would have to fit into. It would have to. We say Alanisim in Noidel L'cha Hashem L'keinu. There is no Noidel L'cha Hashem L'keinu in Bracha Achas Me'in Shalosh. Take a look on your fourth sheet. You have from the Yabia Omer. He brings from the Maram Meiranshberg, and he says on the third line in paragraph Beis, to mention Chanukah and Purim in Bracha Me'ein Gimel, you don't have to say it. He says very, very simply, because some say you don't even mention Chanukah and Purim in benching. Bechlal, there is a day in the Gemara. But the Gemara has a shaila, ultimately the Gemara says you do mention it, but in Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh, nobody ever thought you should mention it. Why? Number two, because there's no Haidah. There's no Haidah in Hamichya. So the Rabbi Vadia says we see that there are two reasons given by Maram Meiranshberg. Number one, because the Gemara has a tzad, don't even say it in Berachas Hamazon. And number two, there's no Haidah in Bracha Me'ein Gimel. And by the way, Lavush also writes this. However, says Rabbi Vadia, I saw in the Sefer Shiur Tahara that there is Haidah in Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh. Because in Noida, how do we abbreviate Noida L'cha Hashem L'keinu Al Shen Chata V'Senu Noida L'cha Hashem L'keinu Al Shen Chata V'Senu Eretz Chemda Toiv Rachava V'Al Shoytz Yisanu? How do we abbreviate that in the Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh? We say V'Al Eretz Chemda Toiv Rachava. So that's the abbreviation of the Noida L'cha. So why can't we put in there So Rabbi Vadia says, well, that's because we might abbreviate Eretz Chemda Torah Chava, but we're not abbreviating anything about Haidah. There's no Haidah. The inyan of Haidah, the Noida L'cha element, is not abbreviated in the Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh. So therefore, yes, we abbreviate Eretz Chemda, but we don't abbreviate Haidah. So since there's no inyan of Haidah mentioned in the Hamichya, there's nowhere to put in Alanisim, says Rabbi Vadia. But then the Sefer Shiur Tahara brings a different reason. Because Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh is a concise, condensed version of Berachas Hamazon. So you could condense Shabbos by saying, how are you going to condense Chanukah? Meaning, Bracha Achas Me'ein Shalosh is a bracha of condensation. You could condense Shabbos. How are you going to condense Chanukah into two words? You're going to say, well, Amar Oleinu Hayavanim v'nitzcham umatza pach shemen uvehidliku l'shma. You're out. You're done, finished. You can't condense it. You know the story about there was a rabbi in Los Angeles who gave a very powerful drasha for an hour, and then after the drasha, a guy from media production came over to the rabbi. He said, "Rabbi, that was unbelievable. You know, I'm in media production. I make clips. You think you could say that drasha in a clip?" So the rabbi guy got all excited. He thought finally he's going to become, famous. He's going to have a clip of his drasha. You think he could condense that hour drasha in 5 minutes? So the rabbi said, "Yeah, I think he'd do it." So why didn't you? So Anyway, so basically, Bracha Achas Mein Shalosh has a condensed version of Brachas Hamazon. If you could condense it, then it's valid. If you can't condense it, it's not valid. You could can Shabbos into a few words. You can Chanukah. Rabbi Vadia rejects that. Rabbi Vadia says, if you could can Shabbos, you could can Chanukah also. Why? You could say, V'al hanisim shal sisal aviseinu b'mei Chanukah elu. So by the offer of the Shabbos, the Chassan said over, this is where he said that the idea when it comes to Haidah, the same way that Abu Jaham says, why do we say Moedim D'Rabbanan? Can't we just rely on the Chazan? Because when it comes to Haidah, everyone has to say it themselves. You can't condense gratitude. You can't can gratitude. You could can anything else, but you can't can saying thank you. So it's either you give it a full job or you don't do it at all. So that's not brought down here in the Poskim. It's a very nice answer. But now with that Hakdama, I want to show you the Brisker Rav. Okay? The Brisker Rav says as follows. He says, why is there no mention of Chanukah and Purim in Hamichya? The guy ate a jelly donut, and in our generation, people are Moser Nefesh even more, because besides the jelly, they put other things on top. So basically, you're risking your life to eat the thing. And so then finally, you're making Hamichya. There's no mention of Chanukah. Why? So Brisker Rav says, very important idea. What is Hamichya? This is mamish definitional. Hamichya is bracha achas me'ein shalosh. Me'ein shalosh what? Me'ein shalosh brachos. There are 3 brachos in Hamichya. What's the halacha on Shabbos if you forget Ritzei? You have to repeat. But what if you remember right before Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Hakel Avinu Malkeinu Adreinu Bareinu Go'eleinu? What do you do if you forgot it right before you started the next bracha? So any siddur worth its $1.50 that you paid for it you make a bracha. You know about this? You have to know about this. If you forget Ritzei and you didn't continue on yet, you insert a bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Shabbos L'Menucha La'amo Yisrael La'ois L'Vris. Yeah, and what if you forget Yalav Yavai? You insert a bracha. And what if you forget Ritzei and Yalav Yavai? You insert a bracha. You know what about this? Very important to know about this. In almost every good bencher, you have B'nei Barachamav Yushalayim Amen. Yeah, so in this one, I won't say which one it is, they have it in the wrong place. So they have it at the end. Kilu, a guy's going to know that if you forgot it, or middle over here, to turn to the end. Okay, so if you forgot it on Shabbos, or Rosh Chodesh even. If you forget Yalav Yava and Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to repeat Shemana, you don't have to repeat Brachas Hamazon. But if you remember then, you make a bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Asher Nasan Roshei Chadashim La'ama Yisrael Lezikarain. What if you forget Ritzei and Yalav Yavai on Rosh Chodesh that comes out on Shabbos? Let's say this Shabbos. You want to be Zoiche in a special bracha that you only make once or twice a year. So then forget Yalav Yavai and Ritzei. You can say Baruch Hashem L'Chalam Asher Nasan Shabbos L'Nuch La'ama Yisrael Ba'abel Yisrael Biz Rosh Hashem Lezikarain Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos V'Yisrael V'Roshei Chadashim. And what if you forget Yalav Yavai on Sukkos? Then you say Baruch Hashem Yomim Toin La'amitzvah Sosin L'Simcha Es Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh. You know about this? And if you forget on Rosh Hashanah Yalav Yavai, is a special nusach. What if you forget Al Hanisim? Do you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Amad Aleinu Antiochus Harasha Ve'api Forno V'yesh Pilim Gedolim V'maisa Yehudis and the whole story B'Hagvina. No, nothing. Why not? You say Harachaman, but why don't you say a bracha? Says the Brisker, from here we see that on Shabbos and Yom Tif, it's not that you have to mention Shabbos and Yom Tif, but you have to make a bracha about Shabbos and Yom Tif. But on Chanukah, you don't have to make a bracha about Chanukah, you just have to mention it. Now, Hamichya, is an abbreviation of the brachos of Berachas Hamazon. It's not an abbreviation of all the ideas of Berachas Hamazon. So since Ritzei and Yalav Yavai have to be a bracha, and if you don't say it in Noidel, if you don't say it in Rachem, you have to make a bracha. Therefore, it's abbreviated in bracha achas mein shalosh. Mashen ken Chanukah Purim is just hazkara. It's not abbreviated. We only abbreviate bracha achas mein shalosh brachos. Very beautiful answer. That's the MS. That's the answer. One last idea, very quickly. On your third sheet. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos, what's Chanukah? The Greeks entered the Heichal. They contaminated all the oil. They only found one jug with the signet of the Kohen Gadol. It was enough to last for one night. It lasted for 8 nights. Ask the Rambam, ask the Brisker Rav. The miracle of finding this jug and it lasted for 8 nights, and the fact that the Yevanim defiled it, that's part of one of the most important miracles of Chanukah. Why do we not mention in Al Hanisim, we say Rabim biyad ma'atim, Tmeim biyad tahirim, Rishon biyad tzadikim? Why don't we talk about the miracle of the Ner Chanukah in Al Hanisim? Furthermore, the Rambam says that in times of the second Beis Hamikdash, the Yevanim made decrees. They abolished our religion. They didn't let us learn Torah. They didn't let us do mitzvahs. But the Rambam doesn't stop there. The Rambam says, and they took our money and they abused our daughters. That's the lashon of the Rambam is, Batlu dasam, lahinichu oisam laslik b'Torah, uve mitzvahs, pashtu yadam b'mamaynam, uve v'naisayam. Ask the Brisker Rav, why is the Rambam throwing in the context of Chanukah, by the way, they took away our money? We know people like money, we got that, but what's it got to do with Chanukah? Says Brisker, what's the nafkamina? The Rambam is not a work of history, the Rambam is a work of halacha. Why is it hilchos Chanukah that they took away our money? Says the Brisker Rav, because what the point of the Rambam is, they took away our money, therefore we couldn't do mitzvahs. They abused our daughters, therefore we couldn't establish Jewish families. The point is not that we were in hard times. This is all a description of the cessation of the observance of Torah mitzvahs. If you don't have money, how are you supposed to buy a pair of tefillin? If you don't have money, how are you supposed to buy the oil for Chanukah? You have to take out a mortgage to get everyone in the family oil for Chanukah. They give out, for matzahs, you got to take out you got to refinance your house to buy all the oil. So without mamayin, you can't be Mekayim mitzvahs. So says the Brisker Rav, the reason why the Rambam says Pashtu Yadam b'mamaynam is because that caused a bittul of Torah mitzvahs. Now, this is very interesting. They looked for oil and they couldn't find. Who cares? So what they couldn't find? Well, how did that change their life? How would that affect their life if they couldn't find oil? They couldn't do the mitzvah of hadlakas hamenorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Why did Hashem make a miracle that the oil lasted an additional 7 days? Why 7? Why not 2? Why not 15? Anybody know? Why 7 days? Why did God make a miracle for 7 days? Why not 8.5? Why not 4.5?
Enough time to make new oil?
Because it takes 7 days, it takes 8 days to make new oil. So what's the miracle of Chanukah? The miracle is that the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash did not stop. The miracle is not that we lit the menorah. The miracle is not that we lit the menorah. The miracle is the avodah never stopped. The miracle is mechuvan. It was exactly 8 days. Shaloi tisbatel mitzvahs hadlaka. Says the Brisker Rav, the reason why the miracle of the Pach Shemen and the other tsarais, that they took our money and they abused our daughters, is not mentioned in Al Hanisim. We say They tried lahashkicham toirasecha ulhavira mechuke ritzainecha, and that was manyfold. The words lahashkicham toirasecha ulhavira mechuke ritzainecha includes we couldn't light the menorah, includes we didn't have the financial wherewithal to buy to afford it, includes we couldn't establish Jewish families. So when we say included that is we were able to restore Jewish life in its fullest sense in all aspects. We lit the menorah. We established our homes al kedusha v'tahara. We were able to establish ourselves financially in order to have the wherewithal to be mekayim the mitzvahs. So the words lahashkicham tarasel v'ir mechukah ritzinecha are all encompassing. That's how the Brisker Rav learns. So we spoke about 3 inyanim today. Number 1, we spoke about why the Gemara omits the miracle. Why the Gemara omits the legislation of lighting the menorah. 3 approaches. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says the Gemara does mention it. Haidah. Lighting the menorah is an expression of Haidah. Rav Shmuel Mikutna says because they didn't enact it in year 1, and we saw today the approach of the Brisker Rav that it's not definitional of the day as opposed to Halel v'Haidar definitional of the day. We spoke about why there is no mention of Al Hanisim in Bracha Achas Mein Shalosh. The Shirei Tahara says because there's nowhere to put it, because there's no really Haidah in the Bracha Asmein Shalosh, but the Brisker Rav says because it's an abridgment of brachas, and there is no bracha for Al Hanisim. And then we spoke about why the Gemara doesn't talk about in the Al Hanisim we don't talk about the miracle of the oil, and we explained that it's all encompassing in their attempt to abolish from us Torah mitzvahs.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.